The U.S. carrier strike group was certain the ocean belonged to them. Aegis cruisers carved wide electronic arcs across the Atlantic. Destroyers dragged layered sonar nets through the deep. Helicopters hovered, dipping sensors into black water like surgeons searching for a pulse. Every screen showed the same result. Nothing. Clean. Silent. Safe. Then the message arrived. Carrier destroyed. Multiple escorts also dead. No alarms had sounded, no sonar spike, no warning tones, just a flat clinical report from the exercise controller that froze every command center in place. Thousands of American sailors stood on open decks staring at calm waves, unaware that, on paper, they were already dead. What made the moment terrifying wasn't the simulated loss. It was the absence of a cause. Somewhere inside the most heavily defended naval formation on Earth, a Royal Navy submarine had been present for hours. Not detected, not tracked, not even suspected. HMS Trafalgar, old by modern standards, smaller than American counterparts, lacking flashy automation, had slipped through a billion-dollar defensive fortress without triggering a single meaningful alert. This wasn't luck, and it wasn't speed. The Trafalgar-class was built for one brutal purpose: to hunt fleets by becoming part of the ocean itself. British engineers didn't chase raw power, they chased silence. Machinery raft-mounted to smother vibration. Propulsion tuned not for sprinting, but for vanishing. Hull tiles designed to swallow sonar energy instead of reflecting it. Where others relied on sensors and processing power, the Royal Navy relied on discipline forged during Cold War patrols in the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, waters where mistakes meant death, not embarrassment. American analysts respected the design, but underestimated the philosophy behind it. The U.S. Navy believed threats announced themselves from outside, like the ring, loud enough to be classified, tracked, and neutralized. Trafalgar didn't announce anything. She waited. When the exercise began, her orders were simple and unforgiving. Penetrate the screen, sink the carrier, survive. Her captain briefed the crew with a single line that captured decades of undersea doctrine. We don't outrun their sensors, we outweight them. As the carrier group surged ahead, confident in its layered defenses, Trafalgar slipped beneath the thermocline, a cold, dense layer that bends sonar like light through glass. Engines slowed to a whisper, then to almost nothing. The submarine didn't move. It drifted, and while America listened for machines, the British became the sea. HMS Trafalgar did not fight the carrier strike group the way American doctrine expected. There was no aggressive maneuvering, no attempt to sneak through at speed, no gamble on outrunning sensors. Speed makes noise. Noise gets you killed. Instead, the submarine disappeared on purpose. As the U.S. formation advanced, Trafalgar slid fully beneath the thermocline, a layer of cold, dense water that bends sound waves downward, warping sonar returns and creating blind zones for surface ships above. To American operators, this layer was background complexity. To British submariners, it was cover. The engines dropped to near-zero output. Machinery was secured to silent running standards drilled into the crew until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. Pumps slowed. Course corrections stopped. Even minor trim adjustments were delayed, waiting for moments when ocean currents could mask the sound. The submarine wasn't maneuvering anymore. It was waiting. Above them, the carrier group executed textbook anti-submarine warfare. Destroyers ran predictable search legs. Towed arrays scanned wide arcs. Helicopters dipped sonar in rhythmic patterns, confident that anything hostile would betray itself through motion, vibration, or heat. Every sweep returned clean. That confidence became the vulnerability. American sonar doctrine assumed the enemy would be moving, closing distance, repositioning, reacting. But Trafalgar refused to play that role. She allowed the carrier group to pass over her, mapping their rhythm instead. Every destroyer turn, every helicopter drop interval, every sweep angle repeated like a metronome. Inside the submarine, sonar operators whispered bearings, not to track targets, but to learn behavior. The carrier wasn't a symbol of power down there. It was a low-frequency heartbeat. Escorts weren't threats. They were predictable patterns sliding through a three-dimensional sound map. Hours passed. No alarms sounded topside, but unease crept into American command centers. Sonar screens looked too clean. Veterans sensed something wrong but couldn't explain it. Younger analysts felt an absence they didn't yet have language for. Nothing was detected. Yet something felt missing. That absence was Trafalgar. British submariners had learned long ago that silence is not passive. It's active control. You don't challenge sensors head-on. You position yourself where they're not looking, then wait for human routine to create the opening technology never anticipates. The opening came quietly. A destroyer adjusted position to tighten the screen. A routine maneuver. A necessary one. For just a few minutes, geometry shifted. Sound paths bent. Coverage overlapped imperfectly. To American planners, the ring was still intact. To Trafalgar, a door had opened. The captain didn't rush. He didn't accelerate. He ordered a minimal turn, so slow it barely registered as movement. The submarine eased forward, not through the defensive wall, but between it, slipping into an acoustic shadow no one believed could exist. By the time the escorts realigned, HMS Trafalgar was already inside the carrier's protective ring. The hunt was no longer about entry. It was about execute it. Ion. Nothing changed on the surface. Jets continued launching from the carrier deck. Deck crews moved with practiced confidence. Destroyers maintained their sonar patterns. Helicopters dipped, lifted, and dipped again, convinced they were sealing the perimeter tighter with every pass. What none of them realized was that the perimeter no longer mattered. HMS Trafalgar was already inside. Crossing the screen had been the most dangerous phase. Once through, the submarine entered the most protected and paradoxically safest space in the formation. American doctrine focused outward. Sensors were optimized to detect threats approaching from beyond the ring. Inside it, assumptions ruled. Allies, escorts, empty water, not predators. Trafalgar exploited that assumption mercilessly. The submarine settled just below the depth band favored by American sensors. Above her, destroyers swept aggressively with towed arrays, but sound refraction bent their sonar beams away from the layer Trafalgar occupied. If sonar were light, she was hiding in shadow. The carrier altered course. Trafalgar adjusted by inches. The carrier accelerated. The submarine let its wake pull her forward, riding the massive ship's acoustic footprint like a cloak. Later, exercise controllers would describe it with a phrase that unnerved everyone who heard it. The British boat was riding the carrier like a ghost. Inside the submarine, tension was absolute, but controlled. Every sailor understood how fragile invisibility was. One valve too fast, one trim adjustment too sharp, one unnecessary correction. Any of it could shatter hours of perfection. But this crew had been trained for exactly this moment. They didn't chase targets. They let targets drift into place. Fire control teams began building attack solutions in whispers. Bearings refined, ranges tightened, timelines calculated. The carrier's massive hull filled their acoustic picture, not as steel and flight decks, but as math. Predictable, unstoppable math. Above them, American sonar teams grew uneasy. Screens still showed nothing actionable, but something felt wrong. The ocean seemed unnaturally empty. Experienced operators insisted it was just clutter, thermal noise, nothing worth flagging. Younger analysts hesitated. The silence felt deliberate. They were right, and they didn't know why. Minutes stretched, then hours. The carrier group initiated a gradual turn designed to tighten defensive coverage. On paper, it was the correct move. In reality, it was catastrophic. The maneuver slid the carrier perfectly into Trafalgar's firing geometry. The submarine didn't celebrate. The captain didn't raise his voice. He simply waited for the solution to stabilize, then issued the calmest, most devastating command in undersea warfare. Fire! 6 simulated torpedoes left the tubes. 2 were assigned to the carrier, 4 to escorting destroyers. On the surface, nothing changed. No wakes, no alarms, no evasive maneuvers. Sailors went about their duties, unaware that, according to the exercise, they had already lost everything. Seconds later, the controller's voice cut through command channels across the Atlantic. Carrier destroyed. 4 escorts also dead. And still, no one had seen the submarine. The silence had done its work. For several long seconds after the controller's announcement, no one spoke. Inside American combat information centers, officers stared at their displays, convinced there had been a mistake. Carriers do not simply die without warning. Not with layered escorts, not with helicopters in the air, not with the most advanced sonar networks ever deployed at sea. Someone finally broke the silence. Replay the last sweep. Sonar logs were pulled. Data scrolled backward. Operators searched for the moment, the spike, the transient noise, the faint trace that would explain how a hostile submarine had breached the formation. But the more they searched, the worse the truth became. There was nothing. No approach track, no Doppler shift, no acoustic fingerprint. HMS Trafalgar hadn't evaded detection. She had never triggered it. Confusion spread first, then disbelief. Senior officers demanded answers. How could a submarine get inside the ring without being seen? Helicopters were immediately retasked. New search patterns ordered. Towed arrays were realigned to sweep deeper layers of water. The entire strike group reacted as if the attack were still unfolding. But it was already over. Trafalgar had no intention of lingering. The moment the simulated torpedoes were away, the submarine reverted to the same method that had carried her in: patience. No sprint, no dramatic escape maneuver. She simply let the ocean take her back. Below the surface, the British crew remained calm. No cheers, no smiles, no raised voices. What they had done wasn't heroic in their eyes. It was procedural. Silent running standards maintained. Logs checked. Sonar teams monitored the American response with quiet precision. They could hear the panic above them now, helicopters racing, sonar beams sweeping aggressively, sensors desperately searching places Trafalgar no longer occupied. The Americans were fighting shadows. In one U.S. cruiser's CIC, a young sonar operator stared at his screen long after the simulated kills were declared. "She had to be inside the ring," he muttered. "That's the only way." An older chief shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "She was inside before we even finished building it." That realization changed the tone of the entire exercise. At the post-action debrief, American officers didn't argue. They didn't deflect. They were blunt. "We never saw her. Not once." British officers didn't gloat. They didn't explain in detail. They simply acknowledged the outcome. Because, to them, the lesson wasn't about technology or national pride. It was about assumption. The U.S. Navy had trained to defeat threats they could detect. The Royal Navy had trained to become a threat that never appeared. As analysts reconstructed the engagement, a chilling pattern emerged. Every American defensive move had been logical. Every sensor had worked as designed. The failure wasn't technical. It was philosophical. The carrier group had assumed danger came from outside. Trafalgar proved that the most dangerous enemy is the one who arrives before you believe the battle has even started. And once that truth settled in, no amount of replaying the data could make the ocean feel safe again. The real shock did not come during the attack. It came afterward. Inside a sealed debrief room, American admirals, sonar chiefs, and analysts gathered around a massive tactical screen. 2 tracks were displayed. One was bold and obvious, the carrier strike group, bright with data, predictable in motion. The other was a thin, cold line that appeared only after the controller declared the kills. HMS Trafalgar. There was no approach path, no acoustic buildup, no moment anyone could point to and say, "That's when we missed her." It was as if the ocean itself had erased the submarine's existence until the damage was already done. One senior officer finally said what no one wanted to admit. "Gentlemen, we never fought her. We only fought what we expected." That sentence landed harder than the simulated torpedoes. For decades, American naval doctrine had been built on dominance, overwhelming sensors, layered defenses, unmatched coordination, and all of it worked exactly as designed. The exercise didn't expose weak ships or faulty equipment. It exposed assumptions. Trafalgar hadn't beaten U.S. technology. She had flowed around it. Every sonar sweep, every helicopter dip, every escort maneuver had been anticipated, not because the British had better computers, but because they trusted patience over power. Royal Navy submariners had learned this the hard way during the Cold War. Fewer boats, fewer chances, fewer mistakes allowed. Their culture wasn't built on confidence, it was built on humility. The ocean is always bigger than your sensors. Silence is not the absence of action. It is action. In the weeks that followed, changes rippled quietly through U.S. Navy training. New anti-submarine patterns, different assumptions, defenses that planned for threats already inside the ring. Sonar operators encouraged to trust instinct, not just clean screens. Among NATO submariners, one thought lingered unspoken but undeniable. If this had been real, the carrier would never have sailed home. For the crew of HMS Trafalgar, there were no celebrations, no headlines, no speeches. They returned to routine patrol life as if nothing extraordinary had happened, because to them, it hadn't. They had simply done what they were trained to do: disappear. Wait. Strike where it mattered. The exercise was filed away, buried under classified reports and routine logs. But the lesson could not be buried. It echoed through war colleges, sonar rooms, and briefing decks across the world. Power does not guarantee awareness. Technology does not guarantee control. And the ocean does not reward confidence. It rewards silence. HMS Trafalgar did more than win an exercise. She reminded the world that even the strongest fleets can be blind, and that sometimes the most dangerous hunter is the one you never hear coming. If this silent victory surprised you, stay with us, because the ocean hides more truths than any radar screen ever will.